Welcome, 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 welcome. Great. Welcome. Oh, is that okay? You can hear me, yes. Welcome, everybody, to this afternoon's panel discussion. My name is Juliet Parker, and I'm the director of ALNAP, and we're delighted to be hosting you here at our offices with ODI today. Just a few little housekeeping things before I hand over to David, who's moderating the session today. The first is, obviously, we're meeting in person, but we do also have people online as well. The session's going to be recorded, and the recording will be available afterwards. So in case you want to share it with friends and family, you're very welcome. We will be having a panel discussion today, followed by opportunity for question and answer. And then there'll be a little drinks reception for networking afterwards for anyone that fancies hanging around for a bit and talking about the session. There is a photographer. Yes. So if and she will be taking photos throughout the session. If you don't want to have your photograph taken or shared, please just have a quiet word after the session, and we'll make sure that your image isn't used anywhere. And that's it, I think. Phone's on silent, and over to David.
And away we go. Am I audible? Yep, excellent. It is an enormous pleasure to welcome a full room here to talk about the experience of our colleagues in Ukraine. My name is David Clark. I'm the Director for Programs and Partnerships at Frontline AIDS. And we have pulled this exciting panel together for you to reflect on what has been a transformative experience, both for the organizations involved, but for our wider partnership as well. For those of you who don't know Frontline AIDS, we are the world's largest civil society network of organizations targeting the end of AIDS. As a network, we are 60 partners that collectively reach 7.8 million people a year. And that network is operating in more and more fragile settings. On a regular basis, it's not just COVID, but we're seeing floods, we're seeing droughts, we're seeing major migrations really impacting the HIV response. And the experience we wanted to share with you is specific to Ukraine, but we recently pulled together some research and some modeling around the impact of the climate crisis on the HIV response, and how that will lead to tens of millions of new infections if we do nothing. And so really, we're sitting with a network of organizations that has built an incredible resource in reaching very marginalized people. And we badly need to understand how to work in humanitarian settings and to build our networks so that we can collaborate in new and exciting ways. And this is just one such collaboration. So let me just introduce the panel. To my left is Andriy Klipikov, Executive Director of Alliance for Public Health in Ukraine. To his left, Tatiana Deshko, International Programs Director for the Alliance for Public Health in Ukraine. To her left, Michael Musselmans, Head of Humanitarian at Christian Aid. To his left, Madara Hetiarachi from the DEC, and Juliet Parker concluding our panel. A big welcome to all of you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I'm going to start with Andriy, if I may. Just talk to us a little bit about how the Alliance for Public Health responded in those early days of the escalation of the conflict back in 2022. Over to you, Andriy.
Thank you, David. And maybe I'll start just saying a few words about APH, Alliance for Public Health. So it's one of the largest NGO, civil society organization in Ukraine working on health. So we have been focusing on HIV, tuberculosis, and viral hepatitis, as well as human rights before the war. But when the war started, we immediately extended our scope. But just to give you an indication how big the organization, so every second person diagnosed with HIV during the war was tested within our programs. Usually civil society plays rather a niche role, more marginal, but we really contributing to the national response. The same with harm reduction. We run the largest harm reduction program in Eastern Europe and Central Asia with over 200,000 people. Our team is represented by 4 people, not 2 sitting here, but also Slava Kushakova in the first row here and Anna Harkun there. So please take time also during the reception to communicate with us. But just to flag that humanitarian response organically emerged. So when the war started, we already had outreach to this huge group of people, and new demand came, like in evacuation or food or sheltering, clothes, other things. So, and we needed to respond. If someone is starving and asking for food, I couldn't respond, sorry, I have only condom for you. Yeah, it's important to be relevant. So this is the core principle of humanitarian support. And we are lucky that Frontline Aid supported us from the very beginning, even before the war, was preparing for crisis response. And with Christian Aid, we met in Lviv with Michael, with Patrick and Vanessa, I think back in March or early April 2022, establishing a partnership which evolved and strengthened by now. So it's very important to say that with DAC funding, we managed to provide support by now to 463,000 people. The most needed support in the most difficult circumstances, sometimes homeless people, people who use drugs, marginalized, criminalized, those who are not getting this support from usual humanitarian sources. So it's a very critical to remember that it's easy to serve socially integrated people, but we provided support to the most disadvantaged communities. And through various channels, just to another figure of, we provided 700 mini grants. It's a huge amount, channeling money to communities, avoiding bureaucracy, adjusting the model we learned from Christian Aid on survival community-led response, applying it to Ukrainian realities. So it was so powerful mix of the experience we already had on the ground with adding humanitarian response experience from Christian Aid and DAC members overall. So that's kind of allowed us to save people, because the numbers I mentioned, the kind of they didn't receive support from other sources. So it was not like I'm getting from UNICEF, from UN agencies, from humanitarian organizations, and from Alliance for Public Health. Not in most of the cases, it was the only support to provide it to these people. That's why we confidently might say that we help these people to live, to survive over the war.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm going to turn to Tanya now. There will be people in the room who will be familiar about how the HIV response has been built over the years, and some who won't be. I wonder if you could talk to us a bit about how you pivoted from what you've been doing in an HIV response to, and how you used that in a humanitarian setting. What were you doing differently? What were you building on?
Well, David, everything we could do was thanks to the assets we have brought into humanitarian response from our HIV history. And well, back 24 years ago, I think we started operating with a great sense of emergency, because then it was one of the worst epidemics in the world that was happening in HIV/AIDS in Ukraine. And we had to act very quickly. And looking at Alvaro, who was then alongside with us, we had to provide treatment from 100 people to thousands of people. We had to do it quickly because we knew how the situation was dramatically turning to the worse. And then, having established the response, we tried to sustain it and transition it to the governmental funding. So that's been the story always with us. We always felt ourselves on the front line, and we kept this pace, this kind of sense of emergency throughout our work, which was so relevant when we started to engage in humanitarian work. But of course, we brought in a number of assets which were critical to enable us to move quickly and to be very, very relevant and efficient when we started to do humanitarian work. Well, not to say that we were reaching annually to 200,000 most vulnerable people in Ukraine, in all regions of Ukraine. So we had the good rapport, we had trust, we had the relationship with the community, which actually enabled us to act very, very quickly and on a very, very high scale. Our partnerships has been localized from the very beginning. So we actually worked with partner NGOs. It's over 100 civil society organizations with whom we worked in HIV and who also very quickly engaged into our humanitarian work. And it was very important that they were so relevant and so local, because the situation was very different. In the east, we had active fighting, and actually we had people were moving away from there. So we had to organize emergency services there. While to the west of Ukraine, those were mainly people arriving from other parts of Ukraine. So we had to make our services 6-10 times larger than what they used to be. Of course, we brought our relationship with the ministries and with the local government that we have established in our work on HIV. In those, we were very instrumental in developing a substitution therapy for people who use drugs in our HIV area. And when the war started, transportation of these very controlled medications, controlled substances like methadone, which normally had to be organized with armored vehicles, with guards, then could not happen because the company that was doing it, they refused it. They said, we will not do it in the war conditions. We cannot ensure safety. We said, we will do it. And we said, we will do it as a civil society organization. We know that this is a medication that has to be taken daily, and otherwise people will be suffering. So actually we stepped in as a civil society organization, and we transported this medication to the patients. So this kind of relationship really enabled us to very quickly embrace humanitarian response and step in it. We had great relations with the municipal authorities. We've been fast-tracking HIV responses in the cities. So then the next day we were helping these cities, like the city of Odessa, to repair windows after Russian shelling of the port of Odessa when they were targeting Ukrainian grain. So we used the network of our partner general practitioners with whom we were decentralizing HIV services to provide advice to war veterans who were then turning up with their absolutely new health needs, and now we're training general practitioners to do this work. We used our telemedicine service that we were mainly focusing on HIV to provide mental health advice to Ukrainians, which are so much affected now. So it's been the approach with which Christian aid entered Ukrainian humanitarian sphere was very close to us, as it is very much about community-led response. It was very natural for us because it is also our philosophy to put communities in the center, to put communities in the driving seat, to make communities actually plan, deliver, and assess what is being done and make sure that it is relevant to today's needs. So this was very close to us, and it was very easy for us to embrace this approach. Of course, there were new things that were brought with humanitarian response and with our partners. SCLR was already mentioned, community-led response, also working with multi-purpose cash. It was new for us. We didn't used to do it in HIV, but it was so well developed, maybe taught to us and jointly implemented that we could easily step into this work. Maybe speaking about the challenges, I will be very frank here that during this almost a week in UK, I think the most challenging conversations are about this support coming to an end. Someone saying that our Ukraine program ended yesterday, or it is coming to an end in February next year. It is not the time to end this support. In 1991, when Ukraine became independent, we were 52 million people. Now, on Ukraine's controlled territories, we are 25 million people. Like a major reduction in population. And out of these 25 million people, 1 million is the active army. And they are not the professional soldiers. They're just like you and me. And maybe tomorrow it will be me. Because they are teachers, they are historians, they are farmers, they are, you know, all the ordinary people who had to step in and fight for their country. And the estimations are that by the end of the war, maybe up to 5-6 million people will be either veterans or veterans' family members. So a great number of people who will come with a lot of, you know, with, well, fighting experience, but a lot of trauma experience, who would be needing a lot of like mental health support, post-traumatic stress disorder, and would need a lot of very specialized. I'm not speaking about prosthetics or, you know, other disabilities related to it. So it's a massive need which is not addressed. Ukraine's economy is, our budget is 60% defense budget. It is not a living country's budget, it's a defense budget. Our GDP is 30% related to war, and many, with 13 millions of people moving within or outside of Ukraine, it's an incredible amount of work that needs to be done in health, and very little resource to actually address it. 70% of assistance that Ukraine received last year are loans. They're not grants, they are loans. So it is not the time to end this assistance.
Thanks, Tanya. I've been with you all week, and every time I hear that, it hits home. It really does. Thank you for sharing that with us. I want to bring in Michael now to speak about the experience of partnering with Christian Aid. There was a lovely moment which I happened to be party to on a call as Christian Aid were describing their survivor and community-led response approach and putting money in the hands of communities. And Slava, who's here as well, his eyes kind of lit up. And there was such a kind of match of values in that conversation where you were, you could see something interesting was going to happen. But maybe, Michael, you can speak a little to the learning that Christian Aid's had in establishing and managing this partnership.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, I mean, it's been very well articulated already, but I think maybe five of the reasons why Christian Aid found it attractive to work with APH included that APH nicely had the skills and the staff and the countrywide reach and the financial capacity to absorb substantial amounts of funding, but at the same time, they were working through networks of local partners that were rooted in the communities they served, and also their local partners were working in the frontline areas of Ukraine where the crisis was most severe and the needs were most acute, which a lot of the international actors were finding it difficult to operate in and reach, and therefore those communities were being underserved by the collective response. And also, APH was very focused on reaching vulnerable groups, including people affected by HIV. And oftentimes, as you know, obviously, vulnerable groups get stigmatized groups get left behind in crises. And then, as also already been articulated, APH, we found, had this philosophy of nothing about communities without communities, and their long-standing community-led, community-based approaches to HIV programming, which we felt was quite a nice fit with what Christian Aid wants to be like. and then I think fifthly, David Clark told us that it would be a good idea to work with APH, and obviously David Clark's a hugely respected figure in the international development community, so you know we knew we'd be fools to ignore his recommendations. And I think, as I mean, you all know, I mean, I can see a lot of people who know a lot more about the international humanitarian system than I do, so it's a bit kind of patronising for me to try and tell you stuff. But I mean, I think that one of the things about the international humanitarian system, which you'll know, is that it tends to undervalue the contribution of people in communities and neighbours and self-help groups and faith-based actors and local actors who actually make an enormous contribution in any crisis. And I think the international system tends to overvalue the contribution that the international actors make because it can see that and measure that, and undervalue the contribution that people in communities make. So ideally, Christian Aid feels like it would be a nice idea to try to enable communities to lead their own interventions rather than come in with our better ideas from outside. And I think that we found, as has been said, we felt that we found a bit of a meeting of minds on that with APH, and not least in Ukraine. I mean, obviously in Ukraine, as everybody knows and everybody can see, when the Ukraine crisis exploded, there was so much commitment and self-reliance and self-help from the citizens of Ukraine to help each other and to so much lead the action so much earlier than the international system getting its act together. And one of the challenges to that is, as you know, that some of our traditional donors, they feel that they want to be more prescriptive about what we do than to allow communities to sort of make up and run with their own ideas. So it's quite difficult sometimes to provide, to convince our traditional donors to invest in this kind of work. But luckily, in the Ukraine crisis, because of Madara Hetiaretsi, I'm not quite sure how to say that. Because of Madara's fantastic fundraising triumph in the DEC, which is really quite extraordinary, we had a significant amount of money from the DEC who, because of Madara's sort of progressive leadership in the DEC, are more willing to allow us to do more flexible, adaptive, community-led programming than our other donors. And I suppose maybe it's also worth saying I suppose, I mean, also fantastic generosity from the British public towards Ukraine, fantastic outpouring of sympathy towards Ukraine, unprecedented since the tsunami 20 years earlier. And I suppose, to be fair, Boris Johnson was very committed to it too. So in the sort of dying embers of his party, who are going to be kind of eliminated on Thursday, maybe it's fair to give credit to one of the few good things that Boris Johnson did, which was to give money to Madara's Ukraine appeal. Thank
you for that impartial opinion.
So what we believe is that the international system should go further beyond just listening to what affected people say, towards putting affected people in the driving seat of developing and implementing their own responses. And that's what we like to do, and that's what we've tried to do with APH, using the methodologies that have been developed by the Local to Global Protection Initiative of survivor and community-led response, as has been already described, which simplistically put involves inviting community groups of different shapes and sizes to put forward very small project proposals, what they actually want to do, to design the proposals themselves and then to deliver them themselves and give them small cash grants through APH, and then with a lot of mentoring and support from APH and its network of local partners to help them along the road. And I'm probably running out of time, so I'll just say that one of the challenges was, I think, that because Christian Aid wanted to be able to evidence how survivor and community-led response can work at scale, in a sense, our instinct would be that, you know, in APH, with APH in Ukraine and its local network of partners, but also in other crises, we sort of try to promote some kind of standardized model so that we can demonstrate that the model works. But obviously, the reality is that rightly, APH and its network of local partners understand the context and the communities and how their organisation works. So they would want to adapt our methodologies to suit the context and their organisation and their ways of working. And we have to learn that, you know, we have to learn to cede power to the local actors and be a little bit less insistent on the details of our methodology in order that can be contextualized. And I suppose that is an example perhaps of how the international system writ more large has to, you know, let go of its desire. It's kind of unlearn the desire that it's had for so long to sort of tightly control what the local actors that we work with do, and just accept a bit more unpredictability and a bit more adaptability. And also, I suppose, I think as part of that process, we need to look at whether all the over-heavy compliance mechanisms that the international architecture imposes upon crises also need to be lightened quite a lot.
Thanks, Michael. You touched a bit on, or not touched a bit, a lot on empowering local actors, and I want to bring Madara in here because the DEC has made a name for itself, I think, in bringing localization out into the wider humanitarian system, and staked a claim for promoting localization. I wonder if you can speak a little bit to the journey the DEC's been on, and what you saw when you were recently visiting these guys in Kiev, how those two things connect.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Michael, for that endorsement. Just for the colleagues who aren't aware of how the DEC works, the Disasters Emergency Committee brings together 15 leading UK aid agencies together to raise funds very quickly and efficiently in the time of large-scale disasters overseas. We work with 3 appeal criteria. First one is around the scale of unmet humanitarian need. The second one around members' ability, whether directly or through local partners, to their presence and their ability to scale up. Third, around public awareness, and we measure that by media coverage. As soon as we launched the Ukraine appeal, we saw the generosity of the UK public. They just stood in solidarity, and it was incredible. And having talked to the humanitarian directors like Michael and others, we knew that it will be a largely locally led response. And we wanted to make sure that we don't, as a funder, we don't serve as a bottleneck. So we really quickly enabled due diligence passporting. We gutted our reporting template so that we make it easier for local partners. And then we had conversations about what else could we do. This is horrific situation. We're hearing from local staff and partners how horrible it is on the ground. What else could we do to accelerate localization? And we commissioned a scoping study. A team of 3, including 2 Ukrainian colleagues, went out and to really hear from local partners and local staff. They are the boots on the ground. They know what conditions they are working under. They know what would ease their programming. So getting the ideas and approaches from that bottom up really meant that we can then think about how do we stand behind that and try and push the needle. For years, there's so many reports on localization, missed opportunity 1, missed opportunity 2, there's series of it. And we wanted to see how could we try and accelerate localization in a well-resourced response here. And the study came up with a number of options, including establishing a local pool fund for local entities to very quickly receive funds, developing a one-stop shop, a platform to serve as a resource for local entities, and looking at reduced tier due diligence approaches. So there's a number of options where we could collectively address, and we are making headway 2.5 years into the response. We're working with the START Network and the National Network for Local Philanthropy Development. They're setting up the pooled fund, and they'll be in a position to disperse funding over the next months. In terms of the platform, that will be Christian Aid and partners are setting that up to really make sure that what the local entities ask for is lined up, and that we're delivering on those commitments. For us, really, it's looking at how could we constantly improve and listen to the colleagues on the ground. They're working in the context, as Tatiana talked about, increased needs on the ground, reduced funding, working in the context of conscription as constantly weighing on everyone's mind. Agencies with funders and donors slowly withdrawing funds and attention being diverted. It's going to be a funding falling off a cliff next year. So there's a lot that local entities, APH and some of the other hyper-local entities are working with. So we wanted to make sure that we are standing side by side, looking at options to make that response better, may improve that response, but also taking the helicopter view and thinking, what could we learn from Ukraine humanitarian response that we could use in Turkey, Syria, and look at how we move the needle across and really improve support to local partners. In terms of my recent visit, it was about 2.5 weeks in Ukraine, going from Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, and Kyiv. And that's what the local staff and local partners are talking about. Give us the flexibility, continue with the flexible funding. It really means that they can be agile and meet local affected population where they are. There's constant, as Tanya talked about, there's constant movement of people going to Poland, Romania, and coming back, going into the eastern parts and coming back. So there's constant flow, and local staff are trying to keep up with that demand, and the needs are changing. So it's really the donors and the funders' responsibility to make the funding flexible and reduce the burden, making sure that some of it, you can't capture the metrics because of that huge change in context. So local staff, local partners were asking about that. Continue the flexibility. Keep trusting us. Trust is a huge factor, and trust us to, they were working before the humanitarian system parachuted in. So trust, ask questions, ask, and then work with us was really the message. And that kind of iterative, being agile and really looking at what the needs are, the changing needs of the population, and working alongside. So good lessons, and thank you to APH for showing me around. Fantastic, from youth, the kids' summer camps to survival-led programming. It really makes a difference to see it, and so that we can advocate back here of the need for flexibility and the need to take a long view in these responses.
Brilliant. Thanks, Madara. I'm going to finish the first round of the panel with Juliet, who we've given what I call a roving midfielder role. We're in the middle of the European Cup. She's going to, we've given her the role to kind of think about how this experience connects with learning from the wider humanitarian system. And I'm curious to hear what you're going to say, Juliet. Yeah. I hope not. Juliet, go ahead.
Great. Thank you. So, I mean, yes, this is a really interesting case study, I think. And I had the opportunity also to talk with Andrew earlier today. So I've already been able to pick a bit at the case study. But one of the important things when we look at learning in the humanitarian sector is that new crises, or evolving crises, are a critical learning point for the sector, both for that response. There is very rapid adaptation, learning and change within any response, but also for the evolution of the responses over time. So what happens in Ukraine will learn and feed into what happens in future crises as well. And Ukraine also, particularly because it was comparatively well resourced by the international sector, had an opportunity for learning that was quite valuable to be able to scale up certain approaches and things. When we look at learning across the humanitarian sector, we did a study a couple of years ago looking at the learning patterns across 20 years of humanitarian action. And we found a really big distinction between sector-specific learning, so learning on WASH, nutrition, cash, where you could see beautiful learning curves, where we could see the sector getting better and better at each of these intervention types, practicing them, refining them, getting better, becoming more instructional about how to do them well. But there were what we call 3 sticking points, which are the ones where we had seen really very little progress over the last 20 years. And they were accountability to affected populations, localization, and linking relief and development. And so the question we were looking at this last couple of years was why? And the reason is a little bit what Michael was talking about, is because we work in a sector that's built for speed and scale. So that's why we have a big machinery that kicks in for major crises, because the humanitarian sector was designed to deliver at speed and at scale. And what the challenge for us as a sector is that what we now want to do is be able to operate at speed and scale, but also to have a customizable, nuanced, localized approach that enables us to be as responsive as we can be to the local communities. And those two things don't sit well together. What I think is very interesting about this case study is that we can see a lot of positives about the way that the mechanism, I call these guys now the mechanism, this set of relationships have been set up that have enabled them to go some way in addressing or at least acknowledging and working with some of those limitations. And really the issue of local actors is at the root of all of them. Because one of the phrases we were using when we were discussing this session a few days ago was, localization is the nexus glue. So when you look at the relief development nexus, which is like a horrible term, it's like Marmite for most people, but actually the agility and adaptability and the trusting relationships of local actors are the bits that can pin all of that together. APH is an excellent example of how a long-term development actor in the health sector is able to pivot and shift its programming in response to its trusted relationships with the communities it's aiming to assist, and take the relationships available to it in the international sector to be able to make that pivot into a response actor. And the example that Andrew gives about, if they're asking for food, don't give them condoms, is exactly that. How to enable those relationships to be as responsive as they can possibly be to the needs, demands, and expectations of the populations you're aiming to serve. So I think looking at it, there are a few kind of ingredients that have been important, and I'm sure there's loads of learning as well. I mean, it's a very positive case study, but I'm sure all of these agencies involved and the communities themselves will have plenty of things they would do differently next time. But I think there are really essential ingredients. One is the adaptability of the implementing organization, the willingness to learn and to adapt and to be open to the learning that's available to them and to repurpose their existing expertise and learning that they have to a new context. The second is the role of intermediaries. So in the humanitarian sector, the role of intermediaries is a hot topic and it has a lot of negative connotations, but where it's done well, it can be seen as a very positive thing. It's just quite hard to document what the quality of the relationship is that changes it from looking good, which intermediaries are very good at doing, to being good, which is quite a different thing, but it's very difficult from the outside to be able to tell what that difference is. But Andrew gave me a really nice example of how they took the SCLR approach, improved on it a bit and sent it back to Christian Aid for their consideration, which is a mutual learning relationship, which is very positive. The other is flexible funding. And, everybody who works in the humanitarian sector knows that without flexible funding, we will not be able to enable the kind of adaptiveness and learning approaches that we want to be able to in order to respond as well as we possibly can to humanitarian crises, which is where the DEC, when it does it really well, is able to use the privileged position of the funding pot that they have available to them to pilot the new approaches that Madara was mentioning.
Thanks, Juliet. Sorry, Madara, did you want to? No. So we've kind of taken you on a helicopter tour there from the ground in Ukraine all the way to a kind of a sense of what this means for the wider humanitarian system. I want to take us back down into Ukrainian territory. I'm going to hand over to Tanya. Just my sense from the outside is that the crisis has driven you as an organization to think differently and to do things that you may not have considered before and kind of use different approaches in the conflict setting. I wonder if you can give us just a snapshot of what that innovation has looked like in your context. Just for the people in the room, we've also printed some material there that takes you to more information about some of the examples that Tanya can describe. So Tanya, can you talk to us about what you innovated, what new things you did?
Ukraine is the country that we love and where we want to live. We understand that it's a country with very broad need and very little resource. And when thinking about, just rebuilding Ukraine to what it was before the war, it's too little, kind of achievement in your life. It's too little to get to where you started. So in what we did responding to war, it was very important to redevelop a better Ukraine, so that every innovation we make, every change we make should be actually bringing us to the new level of response in health or in humanitarian response. So we try to be innovative from the perspective of how this innovation could also be used further after the war is over, after we win the war. And of course, we were following the needs of our population, of Ukrainians who were very mobile. 13 million people have moved within or outside of Ukraine. So first of all, we cared about making sure that they had access to the medications that they have to take daily, HIV medications or TB medication substitution therapy. So we used our network of international partners with whom we collaborate on a daily basis. We established like a directory of services on HIV treatment, and we established an online service which linked a person who is traveling from Ukraine to another country to this necessary daily treatments. It was a Help Now service which has worked 24/7 using all the existing social media and messengers and people, and then helped for nearly 20,000 people who were moving in more than 50 countries in the world. So we have linked patients to treatment there. We have made a step further because we've seen how important it was to have this linkage with your local health advisor, because many people who have moved, they didn't speak the languages in the receiving countries. We had a situation when a child, an HIV positive child in Germany, was prescribed adult dose of antiretroviral medication, and because the mother did not speak the language, neither did the child, so it was very difficult to understand each other. The linkage with the Ukrainian doctor really helped them make the case and understand how treatment has to be adjusted so that the child gets the dose that he needs. So we made the next step to expand our work on telemedicine, whereby groups of doctors who were based both in Ukraine but also outside of Ukraine, because they were refugees themselves, they could continue providing necessary consultations to patients or provide the necessary broader public health advice, or even more so mental health advice in the situation of very acute crisis. We also have used latest technology, artificial intelligence, to develop a virtual outreach work, a digital human, who helped provide advice based on the information that we have populated this virtual human with to people on the move, on the different health situations, on mental health. And it was so important because a virtual human is working day and night. She's working when air raid sirens are on and off. This is something that could ease the hands, the minds of other health providers. And well, of course, but some of the population was very local and did not move. People along the front lines, they are some older, some disabled, but also some communities stayed with their younger children. So we arranged a service of mobile vans who regularly come now to about 200 villages along the front line. They come with a general practitioner, a nurse, a social worker. They deliver basic medical advice as well as humanitarian aid. to about 10,000 people along the front lines. It's a great collaboration also with the local military authorities, because they allow us to enter when it is safe. But well, this is a very different work. All our staff has gone through training and anti-mine training, and they know how to behave safely so that they and their teams are safe. Indeed, we also work to enable some of the long-acting treatments available for Ukraine, so that some patients who have to take daily treatments can take them maybe once a month, using the slow release types of medications for HIV or for substitution therapy. So it also became possible in the situation Ukraine was. And well, it's a story of resilience of Ukrainian communities. It is a story of dignity where we could develop these approaches, but for us, it's an incredible lesson of solidarity that we have witnessed and we have received from our partners and from people who have supported our work. So yes, I'm very thankful to David, who from the very first days of invasion has been with us and stepped in to help build this partnership with Christian Aid, to all the team and frontline aids, and to Gilead, to DEC, and it's an enormous lesson for us about how this solidarity can make support people's life, and can make a difference, and it can restore our dignity and build our resilience.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Very touched to hear you say that. So I'm going to give Andriy the final word before we open up the conversation to us in the room. Andriy, you mentioned it a little bit before. What more can we do? What is your kind of call to action to people in this room who probably represent humanitarian organizations, HIV organizations, SRHR organizations, and wider? What's needed now, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, I actually would like to maybe to start this part also commenting on what Michael Madara said about generosity of UK public and country and citizens and government. So we in Ukraine always remember and appreciate this. It's really made the difference and demonstrated how critical it is. And the DAC is a mechanism. Well, it sounds very like formal disaster emergency committee, but in reality, it's a mechanism to save lives. And I think when appeal was launched, my thinking that nobody thought that the war would last for such a long time. So as war is going on, it's important to acknowledge this as a reality and maybe also reflect and adjust, because the kind of standard time frame for appeal is coming to the end. And well, as Tanya said, we are all very, very worried, because it's not the time to end, because it might cause more like damage in Ukraine, but also will send the wrong signal to the world that it's time, it might be ended. It's time to end humanitarian support. So, of course, our kind of what is next, of course, a big hope that those who are decision makers in this area, we really, our call is that it's the support shouldn't be finished at this stage. It's not a luxury, it's a really necessity of continue providing critical support. As for what specific areas, we actually shared 3 things on the screen, kind of showing that some of the activities are still facing a kind of a mismatch. The Safe Home or Safe Place Center, some of you visited in Lviv, providing safe space for internally displaced adolescents and children. demand is growing because there is intensification of the fire on the east in Kharkiv and other areas on the north as well. But the current funding is only till the end of the calendar year. So it's kind of a mismatch, and it's hardly to understand that the need is growing, but the funding has a hard stop, which we shouldn't allow. So this is a kind of partly why we are here to explore how we can continue this critical funding. Another area is inclusive facility for disabled people, civilian, but also veterans. But veterans, as Tanya said, we don't have professional armies in most of the countries. Civilians were just mobilized, conscripted, and many of them get involved mentally or physically in a month or 3 months and kind of became civilians again. So, but with amputation, with mental disorders, with post-traumatic disorder. So it's so critical to provide support. And this is a growing trend. Even official estimations that we will have 5 million veterans suffered from the war, including their families, in the near future. So it's very pilot the model to provide the services where it's manageable. In case we will face bigger problem, we will already have a solution. And another thing, well, war doesn't bring any good things, yeah, and also mental health disorders and post-traumatic syndromes. World statistics say that it's kind of every fourth person is facing this. Alcohol and drug dependency, again, every 10th person from the experience war affairs facing this. This is data from other countries. We don't have Ukrainian data, but we shouldn't close eyes to these problems. It's really time to address it now. And I would like also to say that I'm Ukrainian, we are flying back to Warsaw at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning and taking train to Kiev. So we interested in long-term solution, in sustainable solutions. So we focusing on communities, but we work with government, with different ministries, with like on our work on inclusivity, we work with President Zelensky, envoy Tatiana Lomakina, envoy on inclusivity. So some of the solutions we developed with rehabilitation center following medical surgery and prosthetics. Government and ministry and municipality ask, let's build an international or city municipal program. We want to be services described, and then it will be funded in the future. So it's very important that we are forward-looking thinking, and rebuilding should start now. It's not kind of start now with innovative solutions, with forward-looking solutions. Ukraine is so needed. So I'm thankful to all of you, and glory to Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you. I feel we should sit with that for a minute, but thank you. I'm going to open the floor up now to see if there are questions from the room. I think we've got a couple of roving mics. Maybe Marina, 2 hands here. Sorry, Dennis probably needs the first word. My apologies. Yeah, you go ahead, and then we'll come over here. Is it working?
I'm not sure. Is it? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay. Thank you very much. I really don't have much of substance to add after this amazing presentation. We at the embassy don't often get to even talk directly to people who work in the field. So this was truly an honor for us, and very insightful information. I'll just echo what was already said. I mean, I remember back in 2014, I had the opportunity to briefly work with the WHO, and that year the Russian invasion began, and I remember seeing reports about how the situation with HIV, for example, started to go up. So there's obviously a very direct correlation, and after 2022, I don't have official numbers or anything, but I know for sure that the humanitarian situation in Ukraine is very difficult. The government is obviously trying its best to do everything possible, but without people like Tatiana and all our UK friends and partners, the tackling the humanitarian situation would be very difficult. Another important thing is that about funding and further assistance to Ukraine. Well, the period that Ukraine is in right now is probably the most crucial that we had in a very long time. So Russian invasion started in 2014. In 22, there was a very large spiral, and now it's really about whether Ukraine stands or not. There's really no window to drop support if we want to survive. And the problem with Russia, and we know this for sure, is that if Ukraine falls, and I'm certain it won't with the support that we receive, but if Ukraine falls, Russia will not stop in Ukraine. It will spread war further, and humanitarian issues will rise in other countries, requiring, again, support, attention, and finance. So if we keep supporting Ukraine today, Ukraine will definitely win, and we will hopefully stop this madness of Russia's aggression. Sorry. So once again, thank you very much. Thank you for Dmitro and Tatiana, for everyone who's working in the fields helping Ukraine. Thank you to our international partners from the Ukraine for supporting us, and again, glory to Ukraine. Thank you.
Well, great for you can join us. Okay, a couple of questions down here. I'm going to let you two fight over who gets the mic. Go ahead. And I don't think so. Is there someone behind you? No? No. Go ahead.
Yeah, wow.
Please introduce yourself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kasper Eriksson. I'm the Director of Strategy and Planning with the International Planned Parenthood Federation. And I'm also a friend of Andre and Tatiana, who I've known for a long time. And it's just great to see you, that you're alive and that you're still fighting the good fight. So really interesting debate about kind of what happens when you move development programming into humanitarian and the learnings around that. Alliance for Public Health, you do so much. You don't just do one thing. But if there was one thing that I associated with Alliance for Public Health, it would be harm reduction. Before the war, you were really seen internationally as experts in that area. I even remember when Putin called Ukraine a bunch of drug users. And I thought of you and doing that. He didn't use the word drug user, I think. Certainly a worse term. I was so relieved when at the end you raised this, because Ukraine right now sits on this bubble of mental health crises that's about to explode. And we know what happens when people are in that situation. Many turn to drug use or even drug abuse. What has happened to your harm reduction program, and where does it go from here? And especially with the the people fighting literally on the front line. What can be done to support them to deal with what they're dealing with right now and what comes next? Thank you.
Thanks, Casper. I'm going to hand over to Andrew or Tanya, either of you.
Yeah, thank you, Casper. Yeah, indeed, maybe just to explain for everyone. So Ukrainian HIV epidemic was very much fueled by unsafe spreading the virus through sharing needles and syringes in back in 90s. So harm reduction is a strategy to minimize harm and risk of HIV infection. So during the war, alcohol use and drug use is increasing, and sex and drugs are not disappearing. They became more risky. Well, if we we are here kind of without journalists, yeah. So I'm talking that with IDP, internally displaced people, people who use drugs when they move, demand in naloxone, this is a medication which prevents overdose, increased 4 times. 4 times because we monitor it. We sending it not in a standard pack, but sending on demand. So among those who are already dependent. But of course, military is a reflection of the society. So if the problem exists in society, the same as in the military. Moreover, there are some special nuances, it can be dependency on from the painkillers. The person spent half a year in the medical facilities taking painkillers every day. It will evolve as a dependency. So some use opiates, some use stimulants to keep up, that's why one of the 3 projects we put to your attention is about addressing these things, not loudly, but rather quietly, because we need to remember that people coming from the war coming as heroes, as defenders. We don't want to associate them with junkies, yeah? And they don't associate themselves. They are not coming to existing infrastructure, to harm reduction points for needles and syringes. But we want to address this issue rather than to hide. And there are some mechanisms to do this. So it's very important to build on this, which again, an excellent example of linking our HIV expertise with the humanitarian need and addressing other things, because drug use and alcohol use sometimes is a cause for gender-based violence, for some other things. So it's complex interlinked things we need to address.
Anything else to add, Tanya? Or
yeah, well, as much as we have involved into humanitarian response, but I think we are very proud that HIV in Ukraine is being well addressed, and we did not see another spike in new HIV infections, and very much thanks to the sustained response and including harm reduction related work. So it used to be that after the international donors started it, then the government picked it up, and actually the government of Ukraine was fully funding working on people who use drugs until the war started, and national budget did not have any resource. So now it's again sourced internationally, but it is really well maintained, I think, but both for the more complicated medicalized programs like substitution therapy, we did not have a drop in patients there. It only increased to take into the governmental program the earlier privately organized substitution therapy side. So actually, the response was so well sustained. And again, it's very much thanks to the strengths of the civil society and the community that had been driving this response. And I felt very passionate about making sure that it continues and that it addresses new challenges. And yes, this is what happens.
Thanks, Tanya. Were there other questions? Alvaro, and then I'll come to Lorna.
Yeah, if you allow me two questions, hope not to take too much time, but two reflections rather. The first one, sorry, my name is Álvaro Bermejo. I'm the director of IPPF, usually known as the largest provider of sexual and reproductive health services. But for this question, I want to introduce myself as the organization that sued the government of Boris Johnson for taking £4 billion out of the aid budget, just in case somebody had been seduced by Michael's image. But no, I didn't mean it in that way. I mean it in the sense that I think when we ask what's next, yes, we can talk about the generosity of the British public, and we should. And in the case of Ukraine, it was there. But these calls cannot go without a call to return the budget 2.7. I really welcome the work that Christian Aid, that DEC, that everybody else is doing to sort of put this case forward and make appeals. But they will never replace what this government has cut 2 years before it had any love affair with Ukraine, right? This came later. This is a harm that it's done to the generosity of the British public and the British people, and that we need to finish every call with a change to revert that to where it was. We all have that responsibility. And I hope you also have the courage to do that when you speak here in the UK. There is no other way of replacing that. The second reflection that I wanted to do was, and there I'll introduce myself as somebody who was a colleague of Alliance Public Health Ukraine since its origins at the beginning. And in 2004, when they became Global Fund PR, the Global Fund imposed on us that we should have expats in Ukraine to monitor what Alliance for Public Health was doing. And in agreement with Alliance for Public Health, we said, no, if it's that, take your millions away. We don't want it. We don't work in that way. And I say this as a reflection that maybe to say that when David was promoting APH to you guys, he was actually playing really safe. He knew they're a fantastic team that is used to carving its own destiny, finding its own path and work there, and that they would be a good partner, and that they spoke English, and that they're white. As I was coming through this door, they asked me how I was feeling. And I said, well, yesterday, 3 of our staff, local staff, got killed in Sudan. And I say that because I say we need to learn as much as we can from this successful experience. And it's really important. But we also need to be clear what the difference is between this experience and Sudan, and why there nobody will have the courage to do what David did and what Michael did, or very few will have that same courage to allow the local organization to really take it on their own path and to grow it in this way and to support it. So I think also when DEC and others have this reflection, we also have to pick that up. They are a fantastic bet and they're a fantastic group. And I don't want to take anything away from the investment you made in making this possible. I think it's incredibly useful. But I think we also need to be aware of that in our reflection and explicit about it. It is really important. Ukraine, is a country that is courting with the EU, has been for many years. It has many implications that came with that other countries unfortunately don't have, but where we need to be honest with ourselves and what we're doing. Thanks.
Thanks, Álvaro. For those of you online, there's a lot of nodding heads in the room in recognition of that comment. I'm going to take one more question and then open up to the panel.
Yeah, there we go. Hi, well, I'm Lorna from the World Food Programme. Firstly, thank you so much, especially to the colleagues from APH for the incredible work you're doing, and also condolences to IPPF for your colleagues. I'm really, really sorry about that. Just sort of wanted to echo what you've said about your experiences in Ukraine. From WFP's perspective, we've also found that harnessing the power of local organisations, prioritising community-led and driven inclusive approaches has allowed us to reach and support, the most vulnerable people in Ukraine, and to sort of bring it specifically to HIV. we found that integrating HIV services within the broader humanitarian aid has been particularly effective. And in case anyone's sort of wondering why is WFP speaking about HIV, WFP co-leads the interagency task team, it's a bit of a mouthful, on HIV in emergencies with UNHCR and UNAIDS. And I just wanted to sort of take this opportunity, it's not a question, but while I'm in this room of esteemed colleagues, to say that the task team is updating the 2010 Interagency Standing Committee guidelines on addressing HIV in emergencies. So just in the spirit of what Juliet was saying about learning, if any colleagues in the room have any learnings from, recent innovations, lessons learned, experiences, please do get in touch with WFP or I believe Frontline AIDS to join the task team and share your experiences so that we can learn about how the HIV movement and the humanitarian sector can work together more effectively. But yeah, not a question, just a sort of encouragement for everyone here. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorna. I believe there's a question at the back there.
Yeah, my name is Magnus and I'm from Oxfam. And this is a question and recommendation, or hopefully you can reflect on it. So I had the pleasure of meeting you both yesterday, and we talked a bit about on localization and also a bit on what you mentioned, Juliet. But now you've been introduced to the wonderful world of the international humanitarian system that comes in, loads of money, load of expats, a lot of NGOs, UN partners who knows best, of course. But if you have your chance to provide a few reflections yourself, what would your recommendations be to us? Because as Oxfam as well, we moved in with the best intentions, said we would be partner-led, and then yet again we completely oversaw you guys, right? And I wonder, like, what should we do differently, right? Because we are very good at patting ourselves on the back and the shoulder, saying like, majority of the funding we channeled was through partners in Ukraine, but in reality, have we really changed anything? And also, if you were to meet, let's say, FCDO, WFP, Oxfam, who knows some of the big NGOs, what would you suggest to change? And that can be anything from reporting requirements or proposal design.
Beautiful question. Thank you, Magnus, and thank you for the bravery in asking it. Over to you guys.
Yeah, if I may start. Yeah, thank you so much. This is really a really good question. So a few reflections. One is that humanitarian response should be very agile. So we, in our humanitarian response, changed our response every time. So when the war started, it was evacuation or kind of online support, or helping people to move to the West, and for some out of Ukraine as war refugees. Then it was a winter time, so it was support with the food and and clothes. And winter came, so it was a winterization with generators, etc. Then kind of other things, kind of Russians started to attack on Kharkiv, or we regained some territories. So it's impossible to plan it. I think humanitarian organizations still need to learn how to deal with unknown things and be agile. If we look at top 10 humanitarian organizations, these big guns, and check their criteria versus agility, dynamic, I doubt they would score high. So in this regard, it's important, well, it's okay. So, but it's important to find a solution. And solution is to have a local partner closely on the ground, knowing what things are, how things are going, and being able to agile. And for donor or big, larger humanitarian organization, provide some flexibility. So I think this is the key point, be agile and dynamic and react to the situation, or even plan some things proactively. Another thing what Alvaro commented on, well, Ukraine or APH is an exception. I think not really. We used to work at a larger scale. So I think what is important to align level of support with the capacity of organization, not to overstretch it or not to ruin. So we are one of the largest, if not the largest NGO in Ukraine working in health area. So that's why kind of our capacity is much higher. But of course, when we also do smaller grants and other activities, we always kind of measure, it should be a capacity and resource proper balance. And finally, on missed opportunity, let's put it future opportunity. It's not missed opportunity. It's of partnership with Oxfam. Yeah.
Ever the fundraiser. Excellent. Tanya,
To say that, well, it was not so easy to access humanitarian funds in Ukraine for us. It took us a while. It's a successful partnership that we had here, and really thanks very much to our collaboration with Frontline Aids and David's direct reach to Christian Aid and their style of working, that they were very open to really community-driven and community-led response, which really came as a good match. But there are so many opportunities which we could not access. We were trying to reach to some of the UN funds, UN agencies, and we were not successful. I mean, because it's such a high threshold, kind of mechanism that it took a lot of time to finally access some of those funds, but still they are. So it's not an easy way to receive those funds in Ukraine. And I think what was maybe successful indeed, the scope and the reach that we have as an organization. So we do have the capacity and the infrastructure and the collaboration to be able to deliver nationally and to be able to deliver in a varied way. So we had the vans which we could use for frontline areas. If we add into that some work for elderly people or for disabled, we can actually do so much more. We had the collaboration with our government and with the military government, which allowed us to reach to the areas which were unreachable and which are unreachable to many of the international agencies. Because they believe, they trust, they speak same language, they understand, and we have a very strong rapport with them. So I think indeed we were so well positioned on our scope, scale, and relationship to actually to be able to deliver so much more. At the same time, we are asking for support on some of the initiatives which we have started on safe place for children or habilitation center for the disabled, but there are unmet needs which we are struggling to fill in. We don't have any specialized program for elderly people on the front lines. We have the vehicles, but we cannot deliver them diapers because we don't have funds for that. We can give them some basic medications. We cannot provide them with some disabled people on the front lines with some of the clutches, some other things that they may be needing. We could do it, but we just do not have the resource for that. We do not have any harm reduction services for military people that we would like to have specially focused on them based on their needs. It is a complete gap now. Yes, there are many things on the table, and we would really like to have opportunity to fill them in. And indeed, for us, the priority is a sustainable and efficient response. This is our country, which we want to make healthy and successful. And we understand that these are the interventions that have to be developed, established, and sustained with the national funds or with private funds.
Thanks, Tanya. I'm gonna see if there's anybody else on the panel that wanted to respond to any of the comments that have kind of been thrown into the room around the humanitarian system or or happy to no. Go ahead, Juliet. You've got.
If I can just pick up
the floor.
There was the comment earlier about like why not in Somalia, and I think that
Sudan.
Was it Sudan? Sorry, yes. But I think that's exactly right, and that's where I think there's a weight of responsibility on the Ukrainian experience to be able to demonstrate and to shift, to shift expectations, so that the argument becomes more like, well, we could do it in Ukraine, so why not Sudan, rather than leaving the burden of proof on harder context. And I think that there's a sort of collective responsibility on that learning agenda to move us forward collectively in a way that exactly steps over those prejudices. I think it's really important.
And it's something I wanted to bring in. My matchmaking skills have been much hailed, but actually that shouldn't be the case. Shouldn't need to be like that. That's actually a failing of systems if they're not open to the right agencies in the right place at the right time, who will be there before, during, and after. So to me, that's kind of the point of having an event like this, to bring that experience into the light, and to say that for me is really, really, really critical. Notwithstanding the specific experience and needs in Ukraine, and bringing that to light. Madara?
Just to jump in, it's a really good point. It's one of the things that we track for each appeal. For about 58 of our 60-year history, it's been very much raise the funding and give it through our 15 member agencies. Over the past years, we've been really doing a better navel gazing of, as a responsible funder, how are we catalyzing? How are we moving that needle? In 2020, we looked at it. In 2022, we looked at it. So really, and after Ukraine, which is a brilliant exercise, we just completed a partnership study looking at Turkey, Syria, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, our open appeals to say, are we actually, as a result of our funding, are we supporting transformative partnerships, or is it transactional? Is it just a grantee by DC member agencies, or are they really walking the talk and really walking alongside? Really good feedback, but there's a room for improvement, and we're working through that. And some of that is making sure that local partners are able to have that sort of equal relationship. When money passes over, there's of course that donor-funder dynamic, but really creating that space for feedback and colleagues on the ground to say, no, that doesn't actually quite work. Similar to the example that Tanya and Andre talked about. They improved on the SCLR process because they know the dynamic, they know the networks on the ground. So we, as a funder, we keep looking at it and seeing what we can do better. And for us, Ukraine was the first time that we allowed due diligence passporting, but now that's standard. And that's how we are going to do. Similar with kind of demystifying some of the approaches we used in Ukraine to try and tell the story for the UK public, who might just have the tip of the iceberg of what that looks like, and really using good practice case studies from Ukraine to say, this is what cash looks like. There's a lot of distrust around cash and flexibility around cash, local partnerships, accountability to affected population, and why we need to pay overhead to local partners, so they're not just keeping the lights on, that it's not projectized. So trying to make sure that we've gathered that catalog of experience and that we take it forward and keep improving. As a funder, that's what we're committed to.
Thanks, Madara. It feels like a good place to conclude, not least because we're close to time. I just want to close with a couple of observations from us as frontline aides. As I said at the beginning, this is a partnership of 60 organizations around the world dedicated to ending AIDS. And frankly, I would have loved to have brought you several more partners, experiences like this of collaborating with the humanitarian system, but they don't exist. This is by far the biggest collaboration that we've been able to broker. And I think there is so much more potential to build on the kind of systems, the kind of trust, the kind of belief that local communities have in the HIV response. And that, for me, that's why we wanted to do this event. was to bring some of that experience and to say to a person affected by a disaster, it doesn't matter whether they're being served by the UN, by anybody. What they care about is, do I trust this organization? Do I trust this person? And that's what we have to think about when we're talking about nexus glue, when we're talking about all of this kind of terminology. We have to think about local organizations who have been there before, will be there during, and will be there after. And to simplify, to bring it right down to how do we best support those organizations during these times of crisis. So I am really open to any conversations where we can broker those kind of similar connections. I will unashamedly say we sit with such a powerful network of organizations. APH is one of many. But also sitting in situations where they are looking at the kind of the gains of the HIV response being wiped out by things like climate change and other emergencies. And so to me, it's so critical that we've sat here with this Ukraine experience because those needs aren't going anywhere, but also because it kind of sits alongside the wider kind of global experience. So I hope you will join me in thanking the panelists, each and every one of them, for their contributions. A couple of other thank yous before we finish. A big thank you to LNAP, particularly for hosting us. Thank you. A thank you to Slava and Anna, also from APH, who've been with us the last few days and just such passionate advocates for their country, for their work, and for people who are often ignored and marginalized. So thank you for coming. If anybody in the room wants to hear more about the work of APH, do invest in a conversation with those good people. The last thank you I want to give is to Marina, who has been an intellectual, practical, administrative driving force behind this event and all of the week's activities that we've had. So Marina, a huge thank you to you. And the colleagues that stand behind you as well, Jackie, Rumbi, and the colleagues here who've helped with our AV, connecting us up to the world. I think those are all of the thank yous that I'm due to give. The final thank you is really to everybody in the room here and who's joined us online. Thank you for coming and keep this conversation going. Thank you.